Imagine this: you've cut out the daily latte, canceled Netflix, stopped ordering takeout, and maybe even downgraded your gym membership. You're doing everything the old school budgeting gurus told us to do. Here's the problem: you still feel broke. Your bank balance doesn't look like that different, and inflation keeps eating away at whatever little you've managed to save. It feels like you're doing all the right things, but the math isn't adding up. That's because in 2026, the old way of budgeting is officially broken. Cutting out coffee, streaming services, or the occasional dinner out might have worked 10 years ago when inflation was lower and costs weren't rising this fast. Back then, saving a few dollars here and there could add up to something meaningful. But today, every small luxury out of your life, the bigger forces, housing costs, healthcare, education, and groceries, are moving so fast that your savings disappear before they have a chance to grow. And here's the kicker: when you focus only on cutting expenses, you can actually end up hurting yourself financially. Why? Because instead of putting that energy toward building income, investing smarter, or planning in ways that protect your money from inflation, you're obsessing over pennies while losing dollars. You might feel disciplined, but in reality, you're giving up quality of life for a strategy that no longer works. This year, it's not about extreme penny pinching, it's about shifting focus. Building additional streams of income, making your money work harder through smarter investing, preparing for inflation, or what will actually move the needle. If you're still stuck in cut your coffee mode, you're fighting the wrong battle. And over the next few minutes, I'll show you why this mindset is costing you way more than that $5 latte ever did. Think back to the classic advice we've all heard at some point. If you just skip the daily latte, invest that money. Out little luxuries, you'll build wealth over time. That mindset came from an era when inflation was mild, housing costs were relatively stable, and incomes had a better chance of keeping up with expenses. But in 2026, strategy has collapsed under the weight of real-world economics. Let's put this into perspective. Say you skip a Florida coffee every weekday. That's about $80 a month. Or maybe you cancel a 10 streaming subscription. That's $120 a year. On paper, that sounds like money saved, and technically it is. But here's the harsh reality in today's economy. 80 or even 120 barely covers the increase in your grocery bill for a single month. Eggs, bread, meat, produce, all of it costs noticeably more than it did just a year ago. A family that used to spend $500 a month on groceries might now be spending $650 or more. Even if they're shopping at discount chains, that 80 saved by skipping coffee doesn't even make a dent. Groceries are just one piece of the puzzle. Rent has skyrocketed in almost every major city, and even smaller towns aren't immune anymore. Bedroom apartment that used to be first $200 a few years ago might now be pushing $100, $700 or more. Gas prices continue to fluctuate, but they rarely return to levels that feel affordable. Filling up a tank that once cost $40 might now cost a $70. Add in healthcare premiums, utility bills, and insurance, and you start to see the bigger picture. The major financial pain points in 20 and 26 are not your coffee, your streaming services, or your occasional meal out. They're the structural costs that no amount of penny pinching can erase. This is where the old school budgeting advice feels out of touch. Back then, gurus could confidently say, cut the small stuff and it'll add up. But today, the math doesn't hold. You can be the most disciplined, frugal person in the room, no takeout, no vacations, no unnecessary subscriptions, and still feel crushed under the weight of rising expenses. Inflation has turned daily life into a moving target where your money loses value faster than you can save it. Take an example of someone making $60,000 a year in 2026. A decade ago, that income stretched further. It covered rent, transportation, and still left room for savings and discretionary spending. Now, that same income feels squeezed from all sides. Housing might take up 40% of it. Groceries and transportation eat another 25%. Healthcare and insurance take another chunk. By the time you get through the essentials, there's almost nothing left to save, let alone invest. Cutting out a few small luxuries might free up $5,000 in a year, but what's that against a rent increase of $5,000 annually? It's like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. And here's another overlooked issue. Extreme frugality can actually backfire. People who cut too deeply into their quality of life often experience burnout, frustration, and even resentment. Skipping a morning coffee with friends, never treating yourself to a nice meal, constantly saying no to small pleasures can make life feel smaller and more stressful. And ironically, when people eventually crack, they may overspend in bursts, erasing all the savings they worked so hard to build. Other words, you're sacrificing happiness without truly fixing the financial problem. That's why the old way of budgeting feels broken. It was built for a different time, a different economy, and a slower pace of inflation. 2026, the real issue isn't whether you buy coffee, it's whether your income, investments, and planning are strong enough to outpace rising costs. Instead of obsessing over pennies, challenge is figuring out how to deal with dollars, big dollars, that are slipping away each year to things you can't control. The truth is, skipping lattes won't make you rich in 2026. What actually matters is finding ways to earn more, grow your money, and insulate yourself from the inflation that's quietly eating your wealth. The focus has to shift from micro savings to macro strategies. That's the only way to stay ahead in a world where cutting expenses is no longer enough. When most people think about improving their finances, the first instinct is to ask, where can I cut back? It feels logical. If money is tight, spend less. And yes, there's some truth in that, but the problem comes when cutting becomes the only strategy. In 2026, that approach comes with a hidden cost opportunity. The more energy you pour into obsessively trimming expenses, the less you have left for pursuing ways to actually grow your income. And in today's economy, between those who only cut and those who focus on growth is where the real wealth divide is being created. Take a simple example. Let's say someone manages to cut $100 a month by canceling streaming services, dining out less, and skipping a gym membership. On paper, that's versus $200 a year saved. It feels like progress, but in reality, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what's possible. Now imagine instead of only looking for cuts, that same person invested those hours into creating a side hustle, maybe freelancing in graphic design, tutoring online, reselling items, or even leveraging AI tools to offer services people are paying for. With consistent effort, earning an extra $500 to $1,000 a month is very realistic in 2026. That's $6,000 to $12,000 a year, 10 times the savings that came from penny pinching. This is where the opportunity cost becomes clear. The time spent stressing about $5 coffees or 15 subscriptions could have been redirected into learning a new skill, improving career prospects, or launching a small income stream. And the difference isn't just in the numbers, it's in trajectory. Saving a little helps in the short term, but growing income creates compounding opportunities. An extra $5 a month can be invested, snowballing into real wealth over time. A 100 cut doesn't compound, it just sits there limited. Another way to look at it is through the lens of mindset. If the only question you're asking is, where can I cut? Then your financial strategy is based on scarcity. You're assuming the pie is fixed and your job is to make do with less. But the reality is the pie can grow. Asking, where can I grow? Shifts the focus to abundance. Instead of shrinking your lifestyle to fit your income, you expand your income to fit your goals. That's how people move forward even when the economic climate is tough. Let's apply this thinking to careers. Someone who only cuts expenses might feel proud of saving $80 a month by avoiding Starbucks. Meanwhile, someone else takes a course in project management, coding, or digital marketing. In months, they're positioned for a promotion or a higher paying job that adds $10,000 into their annual income. The first person saved $960 a year. The second created a sustainable path to earn 10 times that every single year going forward. It's not that cutting is bad. It's just limited compared to the upside of growth. The real wealth gap in 2026 isn't between people who drink coffee and people who don't. It's between those who stay stuck in cost-cutting mode and those who invest in income-building opportunities. Inflation makes this even more obvious. Costs keep rising no matter how frugal you are. You can't cut your way out of higher rent, higher insurance, or higher groceries. But you can outpace inflation if your income is growing faster than your expenses. That's the lever that actually works. Of course, this doesn't mean spending recklessly. Basic discipline still matters. You don't want to sabotage yourself with an avoidable debt. But after you've taken care of the obvious leaks, the real financial power comes from redirecting your focus. Imagine if, instead of proudly announcing, I saved $100 this month by cutting back, you could say, I earned an extra $1,000 this month by monetizing a skill. That shift doesn't just change your bank balance, it changes your future. So the real question in 2026 isn't how many lattes you can skip. It's how you can create new streams of value that the market will pay for. Every hour spent agonizing over tiny cuts is an hour not spent building something bigger. That's the opportunity cost too many people miss when they focus only on trimming expenses instead of expanding their potential. When people first start cutting expenses, it often feels empowering. You cancel a subscription, skip the takeout, make coffee at home, and for a moment you feel disciplined and in control. But over time, that same discipline can morph into something heavier, budget fatigue. The psychological wear and tear that comes from constantly saying no to yourself. And the truth is, when budgeting feels like punishment instead of empowerment, it almost always backfires. How our brains are wired. Humans are naturally loss averse. Psychologists have shown that losing 10 feels twice as painful as gaining 10 feels good. So every time you give up a small pleasure, a lat, a dinner out, a streaming subscription, your brain interprets it as a loss. Do it once and you shrug it off. Do it repeatedly day after day and those losses start to stack up emotionally. The result isn't satisfaction from saving money, it's stress, deprivation, and a nagging feeling that life is smaller than it should be. Now layer in decision fatigue. Every choice you make throughout the day drains mental energy. Should I pack lunch or eat out? Should I cancel this subscription or keep it? Should I drive to the cheaper grocery store across town? The more decisions you force yourself to make, the less willpower you have left. Studies show that once people hit decision fatigue, they often default to impulsive behavior. In financial terms, that means one of two outcomes. You binge spend to escape the restriction, or you give up on the budget entirely. We've all seen this cycle play out. Someone goes on an extreme frugality streak, cutting everything that isn't absolutely necessary. They feel good for a month or two, maybe even longer. But eventually, the weight of constantly denying themselves catches up. Then comes the breaking point. Maybe it's a big shopping spree, a vacation splurge, just quietly sliding back into old habits. All the progress they made evaporates in a weekend. It's not because they're weak or irresponsible. It's because their budgeting system was designed around deprivation, and deprivation isn't sustainable. The irony is that this kind of obsessive cost cutting often leaves people worse off than before. Not only do they fail to build lasting savings, carry the guilt and frustration of failing their budget. That negative association makes it even harder to try again. Budgeting becomes a dirty word, something they avoid instead of embrace. In other words, the very tool meant to create financial freedom ends up feeling like a prison. There's also a subtle but important mental shift that happens when your entire strategy is about cutting. To see money as something to protect, not something to grow. Instead of thinking about opportunities, investments, or ways to expand, you're stuck in defensive mode, shrinking your lifestyle, limiting your choices, and tightening your world. Over time, that scarcity mindset doesn't just affect your bank account. It shapes how you see everything. And when you feel broke mentally, it's hard to make decisions that lead to long-term wealth. That's why reframing budgeting is so important. Instead of seeing it as punishment, it has to be positioned as a tool for freedom. A budget isn't about saying no all the time. It's about making sure you can say yes to the things that actually matter. It's about cutting the noise so you have room for the priorities that bring joy, security, and growth. Maybe that means you do skip the coffee, but not because you're forcing yourself. It's because you've decided you'd rather use that money for a weekend trip, investing, or something with more impact. When budgeting shifts from deprivation to intention, the psychology changes. You're no longer feeling the sting of constant losses. You're experiencing the satisfaction of purposeful choices. That makes the habit sustainable. Instead of burning out after a few months, you build a system you can stick with for years. So the danger of obsessive expense cutting isn't just that it doesn't save much money in today's economy. It's that it drains your energy, burns you out, and makes you more likely to abandon financial planning altogether. The antidote is not to cut more ruthlessly, but to change the mindset. Budgeting is there to give you freedom, not to take life away from you. When you approach it from that angle, it becomes a tool for building, not a cage that makes you feel trapped. There's a limit to how much you can cut, but there's virtually no limit to how much you can earn. That's the core reason why income growth is far more powerful than expense cutting, especially in 2026. You can only cancel so many subscriptions, so many meals at home, only downgrade your lifestyle so far before you hit a wall. But with income, the ceiling is higher. Every extra dollar earned not only increases your capacity to cover rising costs, it also creates opportunities to invest, save, and build wealth in ways that cutting simply can't match. Consider the math. If you trim $100 a month, you free up $4,200 a year. That's something, but it's capped. Once you've made those cuts, you're done. You can't keep trimming indefinitely without stripping your life of all enjoyment. On the other hand, if you build a new income stream that generates even $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. Push it to $100,000 and you're at $12,000 a year. Unlike expense cuts, income growth doesn't stop when you've reached a certain point. You can stack multiple streams, scale existing ones, continue compounding over time. In 2026, the landscape for earning extra income is broader than ever. Remote work has opened doors to global job opportunities. Someone living in a mid-sized city can now apply for roles with companies based halfway across the world. AI tools have lowered the barrier to entry for freelancing, content creation, and entrepreneurship. What used to take specialized training can now be accelerated with the right software. Whether it's offering digital services, creating content, reselling products online, or leveraging platforms that match freelancers with clients, there are countless ways to earn more. And let's not forget career growth itself. Investing in skills, coding, project management, digital marketing, AI literacy translates directly into higher wages and more stability. A single promotion or job switch in 2026 can increase your income by $10,000 to $20,000 a year. Compare that with the first $200 you saved by cutting Netflix and coffee. One represents survival, the other represents progress. This isn't just about numbers, though, it's also about psychology. Who focus only on cutting tend to feel stressed, restricted, and perpetually behind. They're fighting inflation with a pair of scissors, trimming away at small comforts while larger financial pressures keep mounting. People who focus on income expansion operate from a growth mindset. Instead of asking, what can I give up? They ask, what can I create? That shift feels empowering. You're not just playing defense, you're playing offense. And when you're on offense, money becomes a tool you control instead of something that controls you. There's also the compounding effect to consider. Every extra 500 or 1,000 earned each month isn't just cash flow, it's potential investment capital. Invest that income in stocks, index funds, or real estate, and suddenly you're building wealth that grows on its own. Hustle that earns $6 in a year could be invested and with compounding returns turn into six figures over a couple of decades. A to 100 monthly cut, even invested, won't scale nearly as fast. Isn't just in earning more today, it's in the long-term wealth those earnings unlock. And the best part is that income growth reduces financial stress. When you're focused only on cutting, you feel like you're one unexpected expense away from disaster. But when you're earning more, there's breathing room. Rising rent, covered higher grocery bills, no problem. Inflation becomes less of a threat when your income is consistently outpacing it. Instead of constantly tightening your belt, you loosen it slightly, knowing you've created a cushion. Peace of mind is worth more than the lat you gave up. So the real wealth builders in 2026 are the people who have mastered extreme frugality. They're the ones who've shifted their focus from trimming expenses to growing income. They use cutting as a starting point, not the entire plan. Then they build. They leverage technology, remote opportunities, and investments to scale their money. They're not stuck in survival mode. They're building toward freedom. And that's why wealth in the long run isn't built through endless sacrifice. It's built through growth. There's a big difference between being intentional with your money and just trying to spend as little as possible. On the surface, both look like discipline. You're saying no to things, cutting back, responsible. But the outcomes couldn't be more different. Intentional spending sets you up for growth and sustainability. Bare minimum spending often traps you in a cycle of saving pennies while losing dollars. In 2026, when every financial decision carries more weight, understanding this difference is critical. The example of a gym membership. Someone focused on extreme frugality might see $40 or $50 a month as unnecessary and cut it. Technically, they've saved $600 a year. But what's the cost of neglecting health? Poor fitness leads to higher medical bills, reduced energy, and even lost income from being less productive at work. The $600 saved can easily be offset by thousands in hidden costs later. It's the frugal trap, cutting something that looks non-essential but actually plays a huge role in long-term well-being and financial stability. The same principle applies to education and skills. You avoid paying for a course or certification because it costs $500. You might feel clever for saving money. But what if that skill could lead to a promotion or side hustle worth $50,000 in a year? By refusing to spend intentionally yourself far more than you saved. It's the classic case of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. Intentional spending flips this on its head. Instead of asking, what can I cut? The question becomes, what gives me the highest return for my money? That doesn't just mean financial return. It can also mean time, health, happiness, or peace of mind. Spending on skills, experiences, and tools that make you more effective is an investment, not a waste. Spending on conveniences that reduce stress or free up hours in your week can create space for growth. When money goes toward things that truly matter, a lever, not a burden. In contrast, bare minimum spending creates a life that feels small and limited. You cancel all subscriptions, avoid eating out, skip vacations, and refuse to invest in yourself. On paper, your expenses are low, but in reality, your quality of life suffers, your opportunities shrink, and your financial growth stalls. This is why so many people who embrace extreme minimalism eventually hit a wall. Everything they can, but they're no happier, no wealthier, and no more prepared for the future. Think of budgeting as prioritization, not deprivation. A smart budget doesn't mean you never spend. It means you spend on the right things. Maybe you do cut the random impulse purchases, the unused subscription, or the endless takeout, but you keep the gym membership because you value your health. You pay for that online course because it advances your career. You set aside money for investing because your future self will thank you. Every dollar has a purpose. Purpose is aligned with long-term value. This shift is especially important in 2026 when the financial environment feels tighter. Inflation makes people want to cling to every dollar. Clinging without strategy leads to the frugal trap. The people who come out ahead are those who recognize that money is a tool. If you spend it wisely, on health, on knowledge, on investments, it multiplies. If you hoard it blindly, it stagnates and even loses value against inflation. Another way to look at it is balance. Smart spending is like eating a healthy diet. You cut the junk food, but you don't starve yourself. You make sure what you consume fuels your body and mind. Bare minimum spending is like crash dieting. Severe restriction that leaves you depleted and more likely to binge later. One approach is sustainable for life, almost always collapses. So the real question isn't how do I spend the least amount of money possible? It's How do I spend money in a way that makes my life better, both now and in the future? That's the mindset that keeps you out of the frugal trap. It acknowledges that money is not just about survival, it's about creating freedom, options, and growth. In a world where cutting for the sake of cutting no longer works, that kind of intentional spending is the healthier, more sustainable way forward. The idea that you have to cut until it hurts in order to budget successfully is outdated. In 2026, a more effective approach is building a system that balances security with growth. The truth is, a budget that only focuses on restrictions feels suffocating and unsustainable. What actually works is a framework that directs your money toward the right places automatically, leaves room for flexibility, and prioritizes growth. That way, you're not just surviving inflation, you're building a financial plan that adapts and expands with you. The first part of this framework is dedicating a portion of income to growth. Funneling every extra dollar into cutting bills or trimming costs, you set aside a percentage for investments, skill development, or side hustles. This could mean contributing to an index fund for an online certification or even funding tools to launch a freelance gig. The point is to earmark money for activities that create more money in the future. The old school approach that treats every expense as something to minimize, this method treats certain expenses as growth engines. A dollar spent on education or investments today has the potential to turn into 5, 10, or even more dollars tomorrow. The second part is automation. Most people struggle with saving and retirement planning because they rely on willpower. But in 2026, automation tools are more accessible than ever. By setting up automatic contributions to a retirement account, emergency fund, or investment portfolio, you take decision making out of the equation. Money is directed to your future before you even see it in your checking account. That way, saving doesn't feel like a chore or a sacrifice, it just happens in the background. Over time, this builds consistency, and consistency is what compounds into wealth. Flexibility is the third piece of the puzzle. With inflation as unpredictable as it is, you need a buffer for when life costs more than expected. That means keeping a portion of your budget fluid. Maybe 1 month groceries or gas jump unexpectedly, your budget can absorb that without collapsing. Maybe you face an emergency repair or medical bill, your plan has a cushion built in. This flexibility keeps you from the all or nothing mindset that derails so many traditional budgets. Instead of feeling like you failed, when costs rise, you simply adjust within a system that already accounts for volatility. These three pillars, growth allocation, automation, and flexibility, create a balanced budgeting framework that actually works in 2026. It protects you from financial shocks while also making sure you're moving forward. Feel like you're constantly depriving yourself because the system isn't about restriction. You still enjoy life, but you also know that your money is quietly building a stronger foundation in the background. Compare this with the old way of budgeting. The traditional model was built on the assumption that expenses were stable, and if you just trim the extras, you'd eventually get ahead. That's no longer the world we live in. Expenses move too fast, inflation erodes too much, and income opportunities are too dynamic to ignore. A rigid, cut everything strategy breaks under modern pressures. A balanced, forward-looking system, on the other hand, adapts and thrives. This framework also changes the emotional relationship you have with money. Instead of constantly asking yourself, what do I have to give up? You start asking, can I make this budget serve me? That shift is powerful. Money stops being a source of stress and starts being a source of confidence. You know your future is being taken care of. You know you're protected from surprises. You know you're investing in your own growth. That's a very different feeling from obsessing over whether or not you should buy a cup of coffee. The beauty of this system is its balance. You're not living recklessly, ignoring expenses or overspending. But you're also not stuck in a cycle of constant sacrifice. You're building a plan that protects today while growing for tomorrow. That's the sweet spot where financial discipline and financial freedom meet. Budgeting in 2026 isn't about deprivation anymore. It's about building resilience, designing a plan that protects you from what's unpredictable while giving you the tools to grow in ways you can control. When your budget works for you instead of against you, the focus shifts from cutting life smaller to building a life that keeps getting bigger. That's the kind of budgeting that lasts and the kind that actually moves you forward.